Hey everyone, welcome back to Ride the Stream. I am Travis Licata. I'm a writer, semi-extraordinaire of fiction and entertainment, and I am joined by my very, very good friend, Michelle Brittany.
Mhm.
We're here to talk about Lost Season 1, Episode 11, which originally
Mhm.
aired on December 8th, 2004. Um, and yeah, Michelle, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm here with Algernon in case anybody's keeping track of the cat appearances. That's my boy Algernon. I've got Cecily right here laying next to me and Sam off the screen as well. Doing well though, and ready to kind of dig into this episode that's titled All the Best Cowboys Have Daddy Issues. And it's
Yeah, I remember
great.
we were talking offline a couple weeks ago, and I think you mentioned the title of this, and I forgot who it was about. I assumed it was going to be Sawyer for some reason,
I did too.
and the fact that it's about Jack, and there's so much there to talk about, which we will get to.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Well, I think there is a lot to talk about. I can, if you're ready, I can get right into it.
Sounds good. Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so our pre-recorded, pre-written synopsis before we get to our three questions and general discussion. Um, so here we go. If you are looking for an intense, exciting start to an episode, then look no further. Episode 11 picks up where the previous episode left off, with Hurley explaining how Ethan wasn't on the plane's manifest, meaning he wasn't on the plane. Panic mode sets in as Jack asks if anyone has seen Ethan before asking about Charlie. Michael saw Ethan on the path collecting wood, while John saw Charlie go after Claire when she left the caves after Jack wanted to give her a sedative to calm her down and avoid her lucid dreams. When Jack realizes that Claire was telling the truth about someone trying to hurt her and her baby, the next sequence is a blur as he and Locke race through the forest and attempt to catch up to Claire, Charlie, and Ethan. And the music matches that pace.
Oh, I have that noted too.
Despite the frantic nature of this race, John is able to notice something off the path. Not only does he discover Claire's bag, but he recognizes a scattered pattern of footprints that indicates a struggle before noticing drag marks and declaring that he believes that they've been taken. Jack begins shouting for Claire and Charlie, but John puts a finger to his mouth, telling Jack to be quiet. And what I assume is his way of saying, "Hey, don't let the bad guy know that we know that our friends have been taken." Jack wants to continue the search by continuing to race ahead, but Locke advises a different path. Go back to the caves to assess and then coordinate search parties. Does Jack buy into this? Not one bit. John points him in the right direction for him to go alone while Locke goes back to get help. John, Kate, and Boone plan to search north of their position. Michael wants to join, but Locke explains that too many people will slow down the smaller group. Michael doesn't like being turned down, so he suggests he'll start his own search party, which John says, that's a good idea. Just go in the opposite direction. When John, Kate, and Boone do catch up to catch up to Jack, Locke implores Jack to go back. John blames himself, saying, quote, he went hunting with Ethan and he never sensed anything off. And he goes on to say that whatever Locke knows about hunting and tracking, Ethan knows more. And the group can't afford to lose their only doctor. So he says, quote, go back, be the doctor, let me be the hunter. Well, Jack doesn't care about anything about what Locke says, and he just wants to keep searching. And John knows there's no reason to try to argue any further. They continue searching, and they tie red fabric to trees to avoid getting lost. And they eventually find two potential trails. But Kate mentions one might be a dummy trail to lead them away. So, yeah, apparently Kate also has decent tracking skills too. So Locke and Boone go one way, while Jack and Kate go another. Eventually, Jack and Kate find themselves separated after a heavy rainfall makes traversing a steep hill too slippery, and Jack slides all the way down and falls hard to the bottom of the hill. Oh, by the way, Ethan greets him at the bottom, telling him to stop following or he will kill one of them. Jack, again, doesn't like this, tries to match fisticuffs with him, but gets his ass handed to him.
Oh,
And
yeah.
before Ethan knocks him out, he tells him, no more warnings. It's safe to say that Kate eventually finds a bruised and battered Jack, but they keep pushing forward because Jack won't give up. And unfortunately, that leads to them finding Charlie's lifeless body hanging from a tree. It's a gruesome scene where Charlie's face is discolored, so Jack tries to hold his waist up while Kate climbs to cut him down. Charlie's lying on the ground, and Jack performs CPR, and after a while, Kate tells him to stop. She's so distraught over Charlie while watching Jack attempting to save a lifeless body. Background music is sorrowful while Kate tries to console Jack, even leading to the music stopping altogether, almost finalizing Charlie's death. But Jack, again, won't give up and continues pounding on Charlie's chest with his fists as Kate continues to beg and plead for him to stop. It's a distressing scene leading to unfathomable relief as we witness Charlie gasp for a breath suddenly. Jack brings Charlie back to life, and when they're back in the cave and he's recovering, all he can say to Jack is, all they wanted was Claire. Somewhere else on the island, Boone tells Locke he's going to turn back. When Locke tosses him the flashlight, it drops and clangs onto metal. They dig through the mud and quickly realize they found some sort of metal object buried in the ground, further amplifying the mystery surrounding the island. And that's
Good
episode
recap.
11, minus a few flashbacks and confrontation between Saeed and Sawyer and Walton Hurley having some fun playing backgammon. Well, fun. Hurley gets his butt kicked.
Yeah.
So I thought this episode was so exciting. It almost felt like movie scene quality stuff going on with the intensity and the action and um so as the resident Lost newbie,
Yes.
uh what were your impressions after watching this episode?
Yeah, so I think this is one where I definitely remember my initial thoughts of watching it the first time. And that is really desperately hoping that Charlie was not dead. Uh, Feeling so tense, distraught, helpless, thinking that we've lost our first main character. Because even though the woman had drowned out in the ocean, we never really knew who she was. So for a main kind of top seven, how top tier group, um, to think that we lost him, and especially because Charlie is so likable. He just beat his drug addiction in
Yeah.
the last couple episodes. He's getting on well with Claire. He's showing himself and proving himself to be a reliable person. Um, and then to have him lost, I really I was right there feeling exactly what Kate was feeling at the loss. I don't think I was in tears, but the play out of the scene was pretty dramatic, pretty stressful. I think I probably would have been right there with Kate saying you need to stop, which is, obviously mirrored in the um, initial flashback that Jack has with the woman that he's trying to save in the ER, and not wanting to give up on a life. And, given that Jack was feeling guilt about not believing in Claire, and then at the thought of losing Charlie because he refused to heed the warnings, was really impactful. And I did come away with the initial thought of just like, oh my gosh, we've lost one of our own, so to speak, you know,
Yeah.
because now this episode really starts to show there's an us and them. Um, Outside of the little bickering within the survivors, that now we have potentially others on the island that are up to no good. So I do remember feeling how stressed and concerned I was that we'd lost Charlie, and just kind of the impact of Ethan. And oh my God, he was a force.
Yeah.
Not only what we see at the tail end of the last episode and the way he just has no emotion, and the way they've shot him cinematically was always a low angle upward. He just seems like he, as a character and what he represents, looms over us, the survivors, and us, the audience, that it's very scary and terrifying.
Yeah.
And I was left with that impression. I'm obviously thankful that Charlie survived, but sad that he couldn't remember anything, and feeling again helpless, at that. And just generally having another episode that ended in a cliffhanger. We don't have Claire back in the fold.
Yep.
And now Boone and Locke have found this still something, which again harkens back to another flashback between Jack and his father, in which the father says, I've been hard on you because, I've been molding this metal into steel, this unbreakable material. And it just so fascinating how all these little points come together and mirror each other.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, but initially just being very stressed by the thought that we were going to lose Charlie, and thinking that we had lost him.
It's
Um,
such a the way you mentioned with the camera work with them looking up. Well, there's one scene when he's over standing on top of Jack with his foot on his chest,
mhm,
and the camera's looking up to him, so he's like kind of cast in the shadow. And then when they find Charlie, it's similar. It's looking up to him,
mhm,
like, and he's like kind of darkened by shadow and just so very effective camera work along with just the pure measure of what's happening is so daunting.
yeah,
Like Ethan does seem like he is a has this like otherworldly strength. Like you know, Jack has clearly been labeled the leader. And I guess as a viewer or a fan of the castaways, you don't want to see the leader just get their butt whooped. Like
oh
it
yeah,
wasn't even, and I know he had just had a big fall and he was disoriented and that, but um looking at that fight, you would say if they were to fight again 10 times, I'm guessing Ethan would win all of them.
yeah,
And the fact of what he was able to do to Charlie and just hang him up like that, um,
yeah. And
it's
it makes you,
disconcerting.
yeah, and it makes you think, was he alone at that moment? Because that was not an easy feat. And obviously, it seems that Ethan has extraordinary strength, but to hang him in the tree as he did, in that canopy of trees, and does make you wonder if there weren't others with him at that point. And even Charlie says all they wanted was Claire. So he says they, it's not Ethan, it's they.
Ethan. Yep.
And of course, he hadn't heard Saeed's message of warning that there are others on the island. So yeah, it does seem to substantiate what we're finding out. The other thing that I noticed is that we had very little humor in this. Like they went full on
Yeah.
dramatic, tense, and like you pointed out, and I confirmed in the plot synopsis, the music is so chaotic. And it's full on lots of just different instruments, and it is definitely a different tone. It's not adventure. It's the chase,
Yeah.
generic chasing type music that is meant to be chaotic and create disorientation and fragmentation of what you're feeling and what you're seeing. The blur, I don't know how Locke was able to see that bag, quite honestly. That
Yeah.
seems also to be kind of, wow, he was actually able to see this light gray bag in a very canopied jungle that's kind of dark. You made the point of how Ethan would has beaten our hero. It was also very disconcerting for Locke to admit in that same section where he didn't sense anything off with Ethan, that he also felt that Ethan was a much better tracker hunter than himself. So that's very, disconcerting to find out that your hunter, your resident hunter, um,
Yeah.
is bested as well. Um, so it
And that
is,
whole sequence, that whole
yeah,
conversation between John and Jack there is fantastic. The You get that information about Locke's own guilt of feeling like he should have known. Like he
mhm,
hunted with him, and there's that hesitation when he says, "I didn't sense anything off." Like there's that little pause there, um, because he can't pinpoint what he should have seen or known or felt. Um, because this episode also kind of like highlights Locke's feelings of going in the right direction when him and Boone are searching for Ethan. But that conversation where he's just like, it's my fault. You need to go back and be the doctor because
yeah,
everyone can't afford to lose you. He's like, and it's almost like he's resigning the fact that he's expendable. And I know he says, let me be the hunter, but he's kind of, I'm realizing this now as I say, like he's kind of realizing that, they can afford to lose him. They can't afford to lose Jack. And that
yeah,
sucks to hear.
yeah. Because he really does bring a lot to the group, and he does have a lot of knowledge. And I mean, even Walt, uh, the little boy, mentions that Locke is very knowledgeable and he is a warrior in
Yeah.
his eyes, to which Michael's not very happy with. But it's like, hey, you gotta play to your strengths. Now, Michael has proven himself to be able to build things, be able to uh, analyze stress points and things like that, and was instrumental in helping to get Jack freed. Removing rocks. Here's where we got to do it so we don't cause more problems and things like that. Um, yeah, it's interesting that the message along the way is we've got to come together, we've got to come together. And yet they continue to be very much at odds. And I even noted that I felt like the disappearance of Ethan, Claire, and Charlie set off really a series of fragmented efforts by Locke, Boone, Kate, Jack, and even Michael,
Yeah.
and how I keep forgetting that there are the two groups, the one in the cave, the one out on the beach, the fact that they appear to not be communicating with each other, because we see Sawyer comes up and he's getting all the latest news from Walt.
Yeah.
Um, and he's kind of like, what the hell? I have all the stuff, but I've got to come up here because, he says that Jack won't give him his meds. He's got to come up there to the cave, get water, and get his meds,
Yeah.
as he heals from his, you know, beating and torture. So it's just interesting how we're we as the audience are learning a bit more than what they know because we're getting backstory. But it's oftentimes forgotten the fact that we also don't know everybody. And we are, by being the audience watching, we are displaced as much as Sawyer is displaced communication wise and what he knows because he's out on the beach. And most of this is all in the jungle,
Yeah.
away from everybody that's out on the beach. Um,
And Locke even points out when he's initially chasing with Jack at the beginning of the episode and he finds the bag, like he points out, we don't know who's our people. Like
mhm,
the idea of like that they were taken and then Jack tries to clap back by saying Saeed said that there were others and Locke's like, come on, don't argue about semantics. Like clearly
yeah,
they were taken and we can't trust that it was just Ethan because we don't know these people on the plane. And the fact that Ethan wasn't on the plane just doesn't rule out that people on the plane aren't somehow connected. Um, so there's so much distrust in that. And as a viewer, it really makes me question, okay, can we trust all of the main characters? I mean, I
mhm,
hope we can. That's the point. And um, I think that moving forward, I think what we've seen so far, the creators of the show have done a great job leading the viewers in wanting more because
mhm,
there's not only just the unknown, you're getting kind of not force fed, but you're appropriately fed like the perfect breadcrumbs to want to follow along. And the notion of they or them um, is so mysterious, even though at this point we only know that there's one person who's not one of the original group.
yeah. Yeah, and I feel like we know that Hurley figures it out because he did a census. But if you're not marking each other as like, hi, my name is type of thing, then it's pretty easy to slip somebody else in there who's working with any of the other 46 survivors who are not in part of the core group.
Yeah.
And they're not going to know necessarily that there isn't another Ethan to arrive in the group because of the fact that it's split. So until they all kind of come together and see each other's faces, and really say, yes, I'm on the manifest, this is who I am, and kind of basically acknowledge everybody that's on the manifest. And even Walt says, well, um, just because Ethan wasn't on the list doesn't mean he wasn't, because he could have, what? I think he says, well, maybe they changed the name. And
Yeah, I think
or may
Sawyer
yeah, maybe it's
mentions,
Sawyer that
and
says
then
that.
Walt says it's dumb to change your name, which
Yes,
Sawyer Sawyer kind of smirks at, and
yep, yep, because of course we know that Sawyer is not Sawyer. He has another name, but he's going by Sawyer and he's on the manifest as Sawyer, but it's only him and Kate that know that Sawyer is not his real name. So I like that kind of nod to something we know Walt doesn't know,
yeah,
because he's not privy to that conversation. Um, Part of this episode uh, really hit home the fact that what comes across as just being kind of banter, fill the space, um, type of giving pause humor, has agenda. And, yeah, I am a newbie, but I've watched through episode, I think 21. So I am aware of things about certain characters. I won't do this, I won't reveal that because if there's others like me who are truly seeing this for the first time, I don't want to spoil it for them. Um, when we get into season 2, it'll be a total newbie, but um, just the fact that just because it seems like it's innocuous banter, it is not. Every bit in that show is pointing to something either
yeah.
coming up or has happened in the past that we've seen. And that really shows that you have got to be paying attention. And again, it kind of alludes to the fact that this is a show that was meant to mull over for the entire week. Now we have the wonderful streaming, so we can actually go back and look at stuff. But as a person who would have been watching this back in 2004, and you only get to see it once, unless you had your
Yeah.
VCR going, and you rewatched it a few times. There's a lot of stuff that would have like come and gone, and then it would have been out of your mind. Um, and I just think that, that makes it really interesting because we can only remember so much.
Yeah.
And we can only ponder over so much when you only get to see it once a week, basically. And there's just so much to discuss. And I'm glad that we're doing this because, we get to unpack it and talk about it. But yeah, it really hit home that everything that's in the show is there for a reason. It's either a crumb for something in the next episode, or it's starting to lay some sort of foundation that you're going to have that aha moment, you
Yeah.
know, five episodes from now, or, something, or it like I said, it brings home a point from one of the prior episodes.
So something you brought up with um Walt saying it was dumb to change your name, and Sawyer smirks and he said, well, it's fun to get information that we know, but Walt doesn't know. I feel like Hurley is the only one who knows Hurley. And we're still like last week he mentioned like my name's not Hurley, it's Hugo Reyes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna tell you why I'm called Hurley. And this week when Walt talks about Locke being a warrior, I think Hurley says something like, I'm known as a bit of a warrior myself back home.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what does that mean? And then when he plays backgammon, apparently they're playing for imaginary money. And like, but Hurley's also apparently a really good player and finished 17th in a tournament. Um, and Walt's like, you owe me $20,000. And Hurley just says convincingly, you'll get it. Like
Yep.
there's no like deception there that I get, like you'd get from like Sawyer, who'd be like sarcastic or something like that. It's like, so who is Hurley? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I know I've seen the show several times, but it's been 5 or 6 years since I've watched it, and I can't remember everything. Just like you said, it's hard to take in all of these little bits. So at this point, Hurley is a big kind of enigma to where, he's kind of the one revealing when he wants to reveal, which is similar to like someone like Kate or Sawyer, but
Yeah,
we really haven't gotten anything. And I guess we haven't gotten a true flashback episode with Hurley yet at this point. So I'll
mm,
be interested to know, like, why does he consider himself a warrior?
yeah,
What's the Hurley nickname again? So it's just interesting the
yeah,
way that they are able to unpack each episode in a way that sometimes we're a part of knowing what's going on and some other characters don't. And
yeah,
sometimes we just don't know yet. And
yeah.
it's fun.
I think the other thing that fascinates me too, and I know we've discussed it before, and I know we've discussed it offline as well, is the fact that you have different writers coming in, and yet somehow there's a real cohesiveness about the storytelling, so it always seems seamless. Just like if you think The Wizard of Oz and you've got little Oz behind the curtain. We don't know all the details behind the curtain, and I definitely haven't looked, but I'll tell you, I'm so curious about how this show was made. I really want to understand the mechanics of the show because it's just utterly fascinating to me, and just how it all comes together and how you have all these different writers, because there's a lot of writers involved from week to week. Well, usually one or two, but they're not necessarily the main 4 or 6 or so writers that wrote the pilot at the beginning of the season. It's, and it's a round robin of people, and new writers are coming in, and I'm just like, I'm really curious how that works behind the scenes. So I'll be anxious when we get further along and I can like maybe look at some of the initial stuff. But right now I have to remain in the dark. I don't want to have something get revealed, unnecessary.
Yeah.
But I'm so curious about the mechanics of the show, because the way this is like a detailed clock with all of its teeny little gears. This is all the stuff that's going on behind the scenes to make everything intentional. Is just fascinating to me. I was even thinking about how the, and again, we've talked about this before, how the title of the episode kind of brings in and frames things. And thinking that, all the best cowboys have daddy issues, and thinking that it was Sawyer when it's really Jack. But it's not just Jack, because Michael and Walt have, a father son, and they're continue to be at odds. And I Saeed, isn't, we don't think is a father, but there's issues for him. Sawyer obviously has daddy issues. We
Yeah.
know a little bit about that. Even Kate and her father are referenced in this show.
Yeah.
And of course, all the flashbacks around Jack and his father, and how unhealthy and dysfunctional that relationship was. Um,
Yeah.
and how scary that was. I hadn't thought about it, but the fact that Jack and his dad as surgeons, and how absolutely terrifying that would be to end up in ER with a surgeon who'd had a couple of drinks at lunch, and then says,
Yeah.
I can handle it, I'm not impaired. And talk about the you know the lack of ownership and responsibility um that's related to substance abuse. um you know and all the issues around that. Yeah, just very, so multi-layered.
Yeah.
we had with this. And of course, Claire believes her child is a son. Um, well, obviously, she's not the dad, but she has to be the mom and the dad. Uh,
Yeah.
so I think that, it's just, again, kudos to the writers for the titles they select, the music that they bring in, um, all the narrative beats that they put there for us, the little hints and the clues of things to come, foreshadowing of things to come. Um, and that this is really a multi-view type of show, you know.
Yeah, for sure. Um, well, here on Ride the Stream, we have three questions that we will uh, come to each episode. One is talking about, first one would be talking about the favorite or standout moment or scene from the episode. Second question would be, who's your favorite, more most interesting character from the episode? And then third, we usually will pass it back and forth and decide something related to the episode and kind of so that third question's always varied from week to week. Um, so from this episode, do you have a favorite scene or standout moment that resonated the most?
The one that stood out for me is not actually related to the actual activities going on necessarily, but I thought the exchange between Sawyer and Saeed was a standout moment for me. Um, Saeed and Sawyer actually talk in a civil tone,
Yeah,
for the most part. I think Sawyer's a bit annoyed that, he's not in the loop with communication. He may have all the toys, but if, people are not communicating with you, do you really have that power? And it's really, knowledge is the power base at the moment. And the fact that, Saeed is pretty transparent about the fact that he was not planning to come back.
yeah,
And that made me sad, because I'm like, well, gotta have Saeed in the show.
yeah,
So I was really like, oh my gosh, he really was not expecting to be back. Um, and that is a little worrisome that, a character would decide not to come back, so you never know what might happen in the show. But, the fact that he did come back because he felt responsibility to the rest of survivors, um, and wanting to be able to warn them that there are others. And I think what he realizes that he needs to help the others, help
yeah,
the survivors, that's how they're gonna be able to live on the island and hopefully eventually be rescued. But it really was a civil conversation up to the point where Said finally feels like, so you're asking why all the questions, and that's when Sawyer, it kind of, there's like this little flash of like, huh, yeah, maybe I am asking too many questions. And then he just says, well, you know, just so you know, the tide's coming up, the fuselage is, being covered up by the water. Oh, and by the way, I kept your fire going while you were gone.
yeah,
Even though and it was kind of the subtext is, even though I don't agree with you, you tortured me. Um, I probably deserved a little of it, at least the beating, because I misrepresented the knowledge that Sawyer had. But at the end of the day, he did step up and he took Saeed's place to keep
Yeah.
coming in his absence. Um, and I think that my hope ultimately is that they're able to put aside some of those differences, and be able to work together because they're both strong characters and they both bring strengths to the group. And it it felt like a glimmer of light that maybe they can be civil to each other. Um,
In that moment, just to interrupt real quick about
mhm.
him keeping the fire going, it's kind of, I guess, his first take of leadership. Because with
Yeah,
Saeed gone, was Sawyer really the one kind of being in charge at the beach? I'm not sure.
yeah. And he's the one that's going up and getting water. I think he had multiple bottles of for water. So was
That's
he
true.
kind of appointed himself to go get water to take back for everyone else? Was he actually kind of put aside his greed and being more magnanimous to the others on the beach? Don't know.
Yeah.
Because we're not privy to seeing what's going on uh out on the beach. And that's why it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind type of mentality. So we don't really know what he's doing out there on the beach. Do have to call back as kind of my follow-up. I did love when Sawyer was talking to Walt, and that is kind of one of the two kind of highlighted humorous moments. The fact that Sawyer, in all of his little Sawyer ways, is like, wow, I'm getting my news from the 6-year-old, to which Walt says, I'm actually 10. Um, and Sawyer goes on to say, well, you seem to really have an active imagination, and recaps, why would an evil group want to infiltrate our group?
Yeah.
Put a ringer in our midst, kidnap the pregnant woman, and a VH1 has been. And I'm like, oh, I haven't heard VH1 in forever. Um, so I kind of like the meta going on with some of that. And an even deeper cut is that he calls Walt Tattoo, making
Yeah.
reference to Fantasy Island, which I thought
Oh,
was
I was
just
wondering.
beautiful.
I,
Yeah,
I did not follow along. I was like, tattoo. Why is he calling that?
yeah, and the shortest one of the group. Um, I do want to call out real quick, and then want to find out what your highlight was. But I do again want to say that even though Walt is the youngest in the group, portrayed by an actor, a young actor, that they don't treat him like he's the stupid kid. I mean, he gets some good lines,
Hmm.
and he has good things to say,
Yeah.
that I think are relevant, insightful, on point, helps the narrative, and kudos for not writing to trope and just that here's the kid that's doesn't know anything, doesn't have anything to contribute, and he does. So again, kudos to good writing, making him his own character, so that he can stand out on his strengths. And I like Walt. So I enjoyed what he got in this episode.
And I do like that he has enough voice, the character, to like speak up to Michael and say, hey, Locke is a big deal here. He's very helpful. And like, what's your deal? Like, that's essentially like Walt is trying to get him to understand, like, hey, you know, you don't have to be antagonistic towards him. And Michael's only response, like as a new father, is just, well, I don't want you listening to him.
Yeah.
And so, um, I think Michael obviously is still learning how to be a dad, but we get to see Walt be who he is and not necessarily be, he ultimately, nods when Michael tells him he doesn't want to listen to him, but it is good to see, you're right, that he has his own voice on
Hmm.
the show. Which is something I didn't really consider when I initially was watching. Like I didn't like take it fully in. And maybe that's just being able to rewatch it again and take those little tidbits here and take them in a little better. But yeah, those scenes are really good. And for Sawyer only having two scenes, you know, you get a lot out of it.
Yeah.
And with Walt too. Walt has, I think, a few more scenes, but
Yeah.
um, they really do get a lot out of these sequences that take place.
Yeah. What was your standout?
Um, there are a few. Um, the ones that I will say aren't my top, but are contending are the one where Locke is talking to Jack. And there's a couple of those scenes right at the beginning where he's talking about he thinks they've been taken. I think that's very compelling. The one where he's admitting that he's at fault and that he wants Jack to go back and be safe is incredible to watch. Um, the scene with him and Boone, like the scenes with him and Boone are great. You talked about it offline about Boone referencing Star Trek and the red shirts,
Hmm.
um, and the scene that made you laugh with Locke and his what was his exact words? Sounds like a piss poor captain.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, and him predicting the weather. It's gonna rain in about a minute. Like there's just all of these scenes that kind of highlight Locke as a character. Um, Even though he's still a bit of a mystery, there's just so much straightforward logic and skill and so those scenes with Locke were up there. But my top scene I will say is I will lean towards the what looked like the death of Charlie.
Mhm.
Um, and I think the music, I was paying attention on this watch through a little more closely to that scene where, the music sounds sad as, Jack is telling him to breathe and he's doing CPR. And then, at some point, Kate tells him to stop and she kind of puts her arms around him and the music stops. And when the music stopped, it really felt like crap. This is the silence of a funeral. Like,
Yeah.
um, and it was I mean, it still is so jarring to think, holy crap, they just killed off a main character.
Yeah.
But something I noticed throughout this episode is Jack's unwillingness to change or veer off course. He has got that tunnel vision.
Hmm.
Beginning of the episode, Locke's like, we're 10 minutes from the cave. Let's go get a few other people. We'll do some search parties. Jack says, no, I'm pushing forward. When they catch up with him, Jack, go back to the caves. People need you. You can't hurt or die. No, let's go. Kate, again, similar to like you talked about in the flashback where the woman who dies on the operating table, even though he's trying to still perform CPR and his dad tells him to call it,
Yeah.
and the lady dies. And I felt like this was a mirror image of like, oh, the same thing happens. Kate's telling him, stop, Charlie's dead. But Jack, damn it, keeps pushing forward. He says no. And he just starts pounding on Charlie's chest and doesn't give up. And ultimately, what I thought of Jack as being this stubborn, avoiding logic in a way.
Hmm.
ultimately saves Charlie's life. Because there's also a point, I think, when Kate's like, I've lost a trail, we've got to go back. And
Yeah.
Jack is like, nope, let's go on up this hill. And then they turn the corner and there's Charlie. Um, so that scene is just, and seeing the joy on Kate and Jack's face when Charlie takes a breath. Um, and that scene, it seems so realistic. Like Charlie literally gasping, trying to suck in air and coughing and um yeah, it's like you were watching someone physically recover from strangulation and it's very very intense. So that's where I will go. Now regarding to a character, do you have a favorite or most interesting character from this episode?
Well, before I do that, I'm just going to add to your comment that I felt that again, Jack's flashbacks were really mirroring the now versus the then.
Yeah,
And I feel that he does comment when Kate is telling him, "Hey, let's just go back. I've lost the trail," and Jack says, "I'm not going to let him do it again." And I really feel that he was looking in those flashbacks to the fact that he was swayed from what he truly believed in, that his dad had done wrong,
yeah,
and that he signed the report after his dad said, "I promise it'll never happen again," type of
yeah,
thing. And, the fact that Jack wasn't going to be duped again, because later his integrity was, I'm sure, questioned when, it's like, well, you signed this report. I mean, they don't show that, but I'm just, kind of
yeah,
assuming that, he signed the report, but then he recanted the report when he found out that the woman had been pregnant.
yeah,
And his dad knew that fact, but Jack didn't know that fact. And it sounded like she wasn't very far along, but it was enough of the factors to be very similar to what he was experiencing with Claire and her disappearance.
yeah,
So I liked how that the flashbacks, kind of gave subtly some understanding to why Jack was so driven in
yeah,
this episode to try to find Claire, and why he gave up on the woman on the operating table and he refused to give up on Charlie. Um, so I thought that was actually really good. The other thing I was going to say about the music is that I noticed that the instruments were pretty limited. Like it was piano forward with some stringed violins, I believe. So it was very, sad, almost calming, like it's okay, let it
yeah,
go, and then it does stop. And then as soon as Jack went right back into beating on Charlie's chest to try to get him to revive, that music came back in. So all very good stuff.
yeah,
As far as characters, I kind of felt that, oh gosh, I struggled with this one, and I felt that I kind of thought that Locke and Kate kind of together gave some interesting insight into their characters. Like to me, I felt that Locke talking about listening to his gut, and being the hunter subject matter expert to Boone, the fact that, Boone asked him, "Hey, what did you do in your real life, in the real
yeah,
world?" Which I also thought, earlier Locke talks about semantics, so I'm like, there's a reason to use that word because then later Boone is saying in the real world. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. We get the nod to Fantasy Island. What's real, what's not real, type of thing. And we even have Jack saying that he could hear a woman scream, but Kate didn't hear it.
Yeah.
So Boone thinks that in the same breath of asking what Boone did in the real world, he's like, "Oh, you were an assassin or something else, adventure type."
Yeah.
And Locke says, "Oh, I was a supervisor box collections in for a box company," to which Boone is like, "Huh, no, I like my story better. I'm sure that you're joshing me." So things for him, what I found interesting is it doesn't really jive with the person that you're seeing on the island. So I feel like, um, again, what's the deal? Because, that doesn't quite all fit together. On the opposite end, we get, oh, so Kate's a tracker now.
Yeah.
So where does that come from? And yet when Jack is kind of on her ass about, hey, just tell me something real,
Big time.
which
He was
again,
so annoyed.
yeah, which is also interesting because he wants to hear something real. And so she tells him, well, my dad was in the army and we used to go hiking and we would track animals. And I mean, it totally sounds a hell of a lot more believable than if Locke had said, yeah, I was a supervisor, but I played role-playing games. And that's how I learned my tracking ability through fantasy, you know?
Yeah.
So it's really interesting the juxtaposition between their two stories about themselves in the real world. And I just found that totally fascinating that you get two different stories. Locke is telling you the truth. We still don't know if Kate is telling the truth, but her story seems so much more believable, and she says it's true. But
Yeah.
can we truly believe it? Because we don't know. We didn't see it in a flashback. And honestly, in the flashbacks, now we have to kind of figure, is that is that narrative reliable? Where are the flashbacks coming from? We are assuming that
Yeah.
it's Jack's flashback, or is it the omnipresent writer's flashback giving us some intel? And is that true? So it's really hard to know what's real, what's not real, what's fantasy, what's real world, what's fantasy. So I just thought the juxtaposition between those two characters and revealing something real about themselves to other characters was fascinating and kind of a highlight. Obviously, there's lots of other things in there as well, and curious what you came up with for that one.
Well, it was also interesting that we got a little more from Boone in this episode. Um, he asked to join the search party, despite Shannon's objections. Um, you know, Locke initially told him like he should go back and follow the red ties back to the camp during the day, and Boone was like, "I'm not leaving you." I know eventually he decided to go back because he thought Locke was wandering aimlessly, but so it was good to get a little more meat from his character. Um, I I do think the most interesting character is Locke, for me.
Mhm.
His perception to see things and to know things seems so steadied by whatever has allowed him to have these skills. I mean, like you said, like Boone questions like him work for a box company. And I
Yeah.
think when Locke predicts the weather, like Boone shouts at him, like they predict the weather. They teach you how to predict the weather at the box company too.
Hmm.
Um, but there Locke's certainty about things is it's almost nice to have that reliability on the show when there's so much uncertainty from many different things, whether it's the characters, the environment, the quote unquote the others. It's his ability to know a course of action and what's probably the best path forward. Um, but also him not being strangled by pride. Like when Jack refuses to listen, he's not gonna continue on and argue and waste time. He's
Yeah.
gonna be like, okay, just follow me. Like, let's go. Um, so I really enjoy um the direction that his character is going. And I think this episode is I think I realized um that I think this might be the episode where I Locke might have been become my favorite character when I initially watched the series from this
Hmm.
episode because of his like when he talked to Jack with the White Rabbit episode and he talked about he's a meat and potatoes type of person and he
Yeah.
sees things for as they are. Um, but he wanted to go on a walkabout and the island is his walkabout and he's in this episode he's talking about trusting his gut. He's got a feeling, he
Hmm.
thinks he's on the right path, which leads to this unidentified metal object in the ground. Um, so it's interesting to see this meat and potatoes guy kind of go off of that path and just kind of trusting his instincts. Um, so it's interesting that there are so many layers just to his character alone, let alone all the characters within each episode that has all of these different layers. So I think Locke is just so fascinating. He's willing to say what's on his mind, even if it is admitting that he's to blame for Ethan.
Yeah.
And I know Jack did the same thing, and he has a different style of dealing with things where he can't be persuaded off his path. And maybe Locke is similar because in that way, because he's Boone at some points like, dude, we haven't seen any kind of trail for like however long it's been, a quarter mile, whatever, and Locke's going on his own way without a trail because of so maybe he has that similar aspect to Jack. Um, but in this episode, I really just appreciated all of the things that he had to say and the fact that he was trying to avoid conflict while also trying to save Jack from harm. So there
Yeah.
was just a lot there to unpack from his character in this episode. And man, Terry O'Quinn,
He's a brilliant actor.
man,
Absolutely
he's
brilliant.
like, just give me his scenes. Like I'll rewatch his scenes like over and over again. Especially in this episode. Yeah. Were there any other characters that you think would have been close to the top for you? Um,
Hmm.
because I know you say Locke and Kate are at the top for you. Was there anyone else who
Yeah.
maybe inched near there?
Jack, obviously, because we got a little bit more from him. Boone, because we did get a little bit from him. Uh, he obviously, I think he looks up to Locke. And I feel like even though they're not father son, Boone doesn't say anything about his dad. It's his mom's company. He's,
Yeah, right.
working on a subsidiary. Um, and it's it's nice how Locke says, well, I'm sure they've probably got somebody temporarily filling in for you while you're missing. It's it's just kind of nice how, in comparison to Jack and his relationship with his dad, versus here's this kind of surrogate relationship between Boone and Locke, and there's a bit there's more camaraderie, there's more of a connection. And I liked seeing them play off of each other. I thought that they had some really good humor.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole thing about Star Trek, and just the fact that, well, we both like Star Trek. So it's kind of like anybody that hasn't seen Star Trek, and then, he's, Locke is like, well, yeah, I've seen a little, but, I'm not impressed. Um, I think the other thing that I will say about Locke, and being an interesting character is that for him to show when he is not on his A game, particularly with Ethan. Locke has shown himself to be so in tune with the island, and for him to not pick up on Ethan is just, disconcerting. Because he does seem to be so attuned in so many ways with the island, the mystery, and what kind of going back to what did he see in that open area where the view is looking down at him. Makes you wonder, okay, how can he be so out of tune when it came to to Ethan? Does make you
Yeah.
wonder, why did he not pick up on Ethan when he can pick up on the weather? He can pick up on the I'm almost going to say, like, Locke strikes me like the type that would know about the ley lines and feel the hum of ley lines or something. Um,
Yeah.
because he definitely felt something. His gut was telling him, I'm feeling it. So even though they were off on a different path, I think ultimately he probably was in the right place where Claire might have been. Um, so I think gut wise, he was picking up on that, but I think he was also picking up on whatever the metal is.
Yeah.
Steel. And he even says steel. And we hear steel in one of the flashbacks too. So kind of nice how that kind of bridges
Yeah.
again, with that. Even the dad was pretty manipulative in the flashbacks. And I would
Big
say
time.
that, I'm trying to remember, I think that actor's John Terry. He does a very good job being a real piece of work, and just really nasty, and not the dad that you want to have in your life, because it was all about success, getting ahead, um, and having a veneer, having a fantasy, having the fantasy be projected as the real when it really wasn't. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, all right. Well, let me pull up the third uh question. And it's kind of focusing on a little bit of what we've been talking about. So the episode highlights Jack's inability to change his focus, which ultimately leads to saving Charlie. Locke's knowledge of things like tracking, avoiding getting lost, weather, his ability to just have clear logic. Uh, Kate reveals connection with her dad, but also shows like such a her response to Charlie shows such an emotional connection to Charlie. Um, all of these revelations, um, did either one of those stand out or surprise you the most when they came up on screen?
Hmm. I think the depth of emotion that Kate showed for Charlie was probably the most unguarded response that I felt that she has given. I mean, she obviously has a caring soul. I mean, she was concerned about Ray the farmer, and making sure that he was going to get the money to help him so that he could keep his farm.
Yeah.
And the connection that she had with Charlie. And the fact that we'd seen some interaction between them already, um, really kind of solidified that just unbridled emotional moment and how she truly felt, I think really showed through. And I think that really tug at the heart a lot, you know, um, because I was feeling the same thing with regards to Charlie and how likable he is and how he's come through the other side. Um, yeah, I think it was that moment really hung for me uh with regards to how she was feeling in that moment. The fact that, she was there holding his arm or holding his hand while Jack was doing his resuscitation efforts. Um, just the way she paced, I I just felt like she truly believed that he was gone. And I mean, she really sold it. The actress really sold that moment. Just
Yeah.
when she played it was just amazing. Um, and
Definitely amplified the moment for sure.
yeah, yeah. So I think that moment for me, um, her performance and her character and just the depth of her response to his death. Even her going up the tree, and I'm sure you saw that too. For her to get up a part of the tree, it was like the closest, and it still wasn't close enough to cut. And
Yeah.
Jack had to like kind of like swing him and Charlie over towards her so she could try to cut. Um, it just was all very believable and just the whole setup. Um, yeah, was incredible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank
They do
God we
such a
didn't
great
lose
job making
Charlie.
it believable. I know. But you're right. She did a great job making it seem so believable. And,
Yeah.
um, oh, yeah, it's such a intense, crazy moment. Um, the
In
only other
real
thing, yeah, the only other thing I can think of is just it's so out of left field when John calls the weather, like saying it's gonna ha rain in a minute. I was like, that is such a it's cool to see, but it was such a bizarre thing for them to throw in there to kind of give Locke this mystical nature himself. Like, like you said, like, can he feel ley lines? Can he feel like the hum of the island or the what? Like, so I always thought that specific moment has always stood out to me because they're talking after he says it's going to rain for a minute, and then all of a sudden it just starts to drizzle then downpour, and he just extends his
Yep.
arms and looks up and has the biggest smile on his face when he looks at Boone. And yeah, the emotional moment from Kate, that moment there where he beams at Boone with that smile, like because you don't get to see Locke with too much emotion.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true.
so it's um yeah, that scene always is something I'm fond of. So
Yeah. I guess for me, I know that it had rained a couple of times on the island. They'd actually shown that it had rained. a couple of afternoons in prior episodes. So I honestly believe that was a little bit of trickery on that's how my reading is that
Okay.
he already knew that it was going to rain because having visited Hawaii, that's a very tropical place. Um, it would typically rain in the afternoon and it wouldn't last long. It wouldn't necessarily be a really hard rain. It might be whatever, but you could almost count on it, like around 3 o'clock in the afternoon or something, and it would rain. So I honestly believe that Locke was, yes, he was tuned to the island, but he also knew that through experience, it would rain in the afternoon, and he probably had an idea. Oh, it's 3 o'clock. Oh, it's the afternoon. Oh, it rained again at around 3 o'clock. And I just think that that was part of him being tuned in, where others might not actually really notice that. So,
That makes so much sense because early in the episode, like someone says it's probably about 4 o'clock. He says it's 4:25 actually.
hmm
Like, so that makes perfect sense if he's in tune to like if he understands like it's like sundial, like where the sun is, about what time it would be. Like if he tracked that initially, like where the sun is, okay, there's my watch. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. Yeah.
and for our young viewers, watches that you used to wind, versus our Apple watches that have to be plugged in every day
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
recharge. So yeah, he probably had a Timex.
Yeah. Solar charging, possibly. Yeah, such a fascinating character.
Yeah.
And all of you could basically say all these characters are fascinating.
Oh yeah.
So I am excited that we still have 110 more
10,
episodes to go,
110.
um, which makes me so happy. Are there any other moments from the episode that you can think of that you want to bring to light now?
Let me, I'm just doing a quick scroll through my notes because I know that I brought up a couple. Oh, Michael, I'll just point out Michael got to give a nickname to Locke, called him Mount Baldy, which I thought was hilarious. No, just my ending notes. I felt like we had again another really focused episode where it was find Charlie, find Claire. That was the real motivation, like we had with our last episode with like figure out what's going on with Claire. So again, I
Yep.
felt like we had a real focus around a particular storyline. We also had another cliffhanger. We had two. We're still wondering where Claire has gotten to. And also wondering what did Locke and Boone find because it closes out on them digging in the mud to clear out so that they could see what this steel piece was. Was it a piece of a plane? What is that?
Yeah.
So we're left very much in the dark on those two issues.
Yeah.
That was it for
I was
me.
looking at my notes, and earlier we talked about how Locke admitted that Jack needed to be safe and admitted that essentially, like, he's expendable in that case, as let him be the hunter. But there's another line when they're tying, Locke is initially doing the red ties before Boone takes over, and he says they're
Ah,
doing that so they don't get lost. And Boone's like, "Well, can't you just lead us back to the camp?" He was like, "You can lead us back to the camp, right?" And his exact words are,
mm-hmm.
"If nothing happens to me."
Yep.
So again, he kind of highlights that, you know, I think he's understanding his skill set compared to Ethan, and that him moving forward is potentially a one-way trip, which is really I don't know if there's another character. He doesn't say it outright, but is so openly talking about his not his faults, but his ceiling on as far as his capabilities go. Even though we've seen him be so capable at so many things, like him being open and admitting that, like, look,
Yeah.
I can bring you back to camp, but that's if I'm still here. Jack, you need to be safe, not necessarily me. So it
Yeah.
was very like this is also an episode that like heightens my concern for Locke. Well, like, is this some ominous hidden message about Locke's fate going forward because he's aware of his own mortality and whether or not that's significant to the group as a whole? So it's just there are a lot of alarming things in this episode. You know, obviously visually seeing Charlie hanging from the tree is
Oh my gosh.
uh
Yeah.
poof, that's so scary. But all these other revelations with Locke and Jack's past, there's just it's amazing that like we can talk about this a single episode for as long as we talk about each episode, and just because there's so much there.
hmm hmm Yeah, we talk
Um,
longer about an episode than the episode's length.
um,
But
well,
you're
I think,
right. The other thing is that even we had Saeed reveal that he was not planning to return. And that's scary too. So we've got, two characters that have said that they, you know, might not be back. Then, you have to worry about Jack because he's our kind of our leader. But he's only as good a leader as all the people around him. So yeah, it's not balanced. There's not a cadence yet to this group.
yeah,
So,
and I remember what we talked about when Saeed left initially, and
hmm
that there was that ominous sense of like, oh my God, is Saeed done with the show?
yeah,
Like, and the fact that they verified that there wasn't an intent for him to come back, or his intent like was to stay away.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, you're right. There's no safety like with these characters. And Charlie nearly dying is like the peak of that.
yeah. This again is where, I kind of wish, oh, I wish I'd been watching this back at that time because this is kind of the George R. R. Martin approach to characters. And that the ones that you tend to love are the ones, well, they're gone, without, and, pretty dramatically, you think that they're going to be there because that's the way television writing has always been, is that you always have your protagonist and they're our hero. They will come through and they will survive.
Yeah.
And this really tosses that concept, that kind of established trope with television writing that you'll always have that main person. And I think this is what keeps it kind of lopsided and keeps you kind of in that perpetual state of lost because you don't know if that's really going to be the case with this show.
Right. Yeah. Oh, well, um, with that, I think we can wrap up this episode. For anyone that's watching, thank you for uh, sticking with us. And if you want to talk along with us and leave a comment about who your favorite character is, most interesting scene, please leave them in the comments. But please try to be spoiler free of future episodes or seasons. Or if you do have a spoiler comment, please just make sure to write spoiler ahead. So that way Michelle doesn't get spoiled on anything.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, all the things that are directed your way. We do appreciate your watching, but if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and we'll be back again next week for another lively discussion on episode 12.
Can't wait already.
I know, me neither.